The Brooklyn Nets have been hosting a fire sale recently. Let's talk about one of the most desired role players in the league, one of my favorite players, Cameron Johnson.
Bridges has it. They gotta go. It's Payne. Johnson for the win. Time.
Back to get some space. He's got the last 9 points. The crowd on its feet. Need a miss here. Johnson.
Brooklyn has quickly been selling their team and are a team that is clearly tanking to get ready for the upcoming draft. Not too long ago, we saw them trade Dennis Schroeder to the Warriors, and today they traded away Dorian Finney-Smith for a second stint with D'Angelo Russell. This leaves Cameron Johnson and Cameron Thomas as the 2 high trade value asset players on the roster, and I want to talk about one of my favorite players, the former Sun, Cameron Johnson. So far, he is averaging 19 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists, with basically all of those being career highs, especially for that points amount. His shooting splits are absolutely incredible, with him shooting nearly 50% from the field, 43% from 3, and 88% from the line, putting him just below that 50-40-90 mark. And of course, all of those are career highs for him, with this year him taking the most shots that he has for his career. Johnson is distinguishing himself as a 3-level scorer, being incredibly effective at all levels. And I want to highlight some of his plays that just makes him such an elite player and why there are contenders out there that need him. First off, let's talk about scoring in handoffs, because this is something that Cameron Johnson isn't just good at, but he is elite at. According to NBA.com, he is in the 72nd percentile of all players. He is 4th in total scoring based off of points per possession, and he is more efficient than the top 7 players when it comes to handoffs. And this is something we see happen a lot that the Brooklyn Nets do, where he is taking handoffs and he is coming off of screens, sometimes coming off of a screen into a handoff. He's great at shooting off the dribble or taking a few steps to get just enough space. Johnson is 6'7" and has great range. If you go under on him, or if you play drop coverage, which a lot of teams do with guys like Nick Claxton and Ben Simmons, you give Cameron Johnson a lot of room to work with, and this is something he makes you pay for multiple times per game. Going into that, he has almost the exact same stats for coming off of screens. According to NBA.com, he is in the 98th percentile when it comes to scoring off of screens, and he is 3rd in the entire league, once again being more efficient than other players within the top 10. Coming off of a screen and either driving to the hoop or getting a chance to catch and shoot, there is simply no better players than when it comes to Cameron Johnson. Based off of both cuts and isolation, he is incredibly efficient, scoring above the 80th percentiles for both of those kind of scoring plays. However, he doesn't take these too often per game, and this is something you see only once a game or maybe every other game, but he is incredibly efficient when he's in those actions. To me, Cameron Johnson is basically a slightly smaller Michael Porter Jr. He's a slightly better playmaker than Porter Jr., although I do sometimes see some of those moments where he could be passing the ball more or he could be passing a little quicker, but he's definitely not a black hole in the same way that MPJ is. Most of his points come off of assists, where there's nothing wrong with it, because if you watch a lot of these Nets games, they're not just catch and shoot shots, there's often a little bit of work going into it. He's taken the most amount of shots at the rim since his time in Phoenix, which was almost about 3.5 years ago, which is crazy to think about as someone who loved that team. He's taking a lot of corner shots, which are incredibly efficient for him as well, and it's no surprise that he has the highest true shooting percentage of his entire career. But overall, his efficiency has just steadily been growing as he's been in Brooklyn, and this year we have really seen that take a massive leap. Not to mention, he's also getting to the free throw line more than he ever has in his career, just showing that he is slashing the ball, and he is slashing at a pretty effective rate. Looking at his on-off ratings, the Nets are an absolutely disastrous team, and like I said, they're actively tanking. But the Nets offense gets about 5 points per 100 possessions better when he's on the court, putting their offensive rating up to about 113. Defensively, they get a little bit worse, but honestly, I don't know how much of this is Johnson. Cameron Johnson is a decent defender. He could be a lot better, but he also possesses good size, and he typically isn't the reason why a team's defense is bad, and if you surround him with some good defenders, he can typically be alright. And speaking of playing alright, the 3 players that he has had some of the best track record of playing with include Dorian Finney-Smith, Cameron Thomas, and Dennis Schroeder. To me, this looks like Cameron Johnson is best paired with either a guard that can play make can draw a little bit of the offense on their own like Cameron Thomas, or by an elite defender who can also space out the floor in Dorian Finney-Smith. But Cameron Johnson has been on an absolute tear for the season, and it's no surprise that he is in the trade talks that he is. And not to mention, for the month of December, he is up to 23 points per game, showing that he truly can be a pretty high-level scorer on a team that is pretty much forgotten about. Now, I wouldn't call Cameron Johnson a second or even a third player on a contending level team, but on a team that needs offense and that they need scoring and shooting, especially coming off of the bench, Cameron Johnson is a player that they need to go for. And that's why the Oklahoma City Thunder have been rumored with Cameron Johnson the most, and it makes so much sense. First off, they can actually afford him without even going over the second apron, something that many teams have been fearful of so far. Second, they have a ton of capital, both in players and draft picks, to try and trade for Johnson. And the Brooklyn Nets are being a tanking team. They're trying to gather as much as they can, and they're going to be one of the teams with the most draft picks going through around the 2029-2030 season, giving them a ton of chances for a bright future. But then you look at that Thunder team. This team is elite on defense. They have someone in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander who can take gravity and can play make. And then you have Isaiah Hartenstein, who is an incredibly underrated center. He's great on defense, and he is great in handoffs. I think this is a perfect opportunity for Cam Johnson to show up. He'd probably be coming off of the bench or could be an occasional starter for them, but I think Cameron Johnson can play well into their defense because there's enough good defenders for him to buy into that system, but he can give them the three-point shooting and the scoring threat that they need. When you have a guy who's capable of scoring 20 plus per game coming off of the bench and a guy who doesn't disrupt the offense, that is something that every single team in the league can use. Because if you look at the scoring types that I mentioned that Cameron Johnson is elite at, both handoffs and coming off of screens, these are natural actions that happen within an offense that don't disrupt an offense. And Cameron Johnson is not one to take too many bad shots. The Thunder are already an elite team, but they could easily trade for Cameron Johnson, and they can give the Brooklyn Nets something that they want, and I think he could put this Thunder team over the edge. But two other teams to talk about really quickly. I think the Houston Rockets can benefit in the same way, as Houston has an elite defense, but they could still use some three-point shooting, they could still use some spacing and a little bit of offensive creation. And the exact same thing can be said for the Orlando Magic. The Magic have had a ton of injuries, yet they're still showing that resilience. Orlando's needed offense and they've needed spacing for a few years. I don't know the exact situations financially and capital-wise, but it definitely seems like if the Magic wanted to, they could make a move for him. You could also make a quick shout out for the Kings, as they might try to do whatever they can to keep De'Aaron Fox, but that is its own video, and it kind of seems like the Kings are headed for some sort of a rebuild, but I would like to see what he could do there. No matter where he goes, it seems like it is set that it is best for Cameron Johnson to be on another team by the end of the year, and that's something that I hope happens. He has a skill set that can be plugged into basically any kind of offense, and he's going to raise that ceiling, especially of your bench. Now that Dennis Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith are gone, we know that he's not going to be going to a team like the Warriors or the Lakers, as he probably would have already been packaged in those deals, so I would rule those teams out. But the Brooklyn Nets have definitely had their office open when it comes to receiving phone calls for trade offers, and I wouldn't be surprised if Cameron Johnson is the next one in line to get sent off to a new home. Guys, that is it for this one. If you liked the video, you know what to do, but I will catch you all later.